The demand for reliable, high-speed and consistent connectivity has never been as high, and even more so as the world has embraced a hybrid way of operating, communicating and consuming services of all kinds. This trend has put increased expectations on network operators, which are now investing hugely into broadband rollouts globally. To talk more about the broadband market, its potential and its challenges, I'm happy to be joined by Martin Creaner, Director General of the World Broadband Association. So, Martin, to start things off, what is the current landscape of the global broadband market?
I suppose in a single word, booming, I think is a reasonable description. It's booming post-COVID. It's that as has been documented by many people, during COVID, we found ourselves increasingly working from home, working remotely, and so on. And of course, a lot of that has hung over into the post-COVID world. We've also seen things like the emergence of the first hints of the metaverse, which are putting stronger demands on broadband capability. The ongoing, as I say, remote working, but also things like smart factories, smart hospitals, smart retail, smart government, and so on. That's all, I suppose, on the what I would call maybe the supply side, the capability aspects of it. But we're also seeing the technology moving fast, and we're seeing constant innovation from the supply side on the different aspects of broadband as well. And so, all in all, you're seeing a broadband world that's growing at somewhere between 6 and 7% per annum. You're seeing a market that's probably somewhere around the 300 billion level at the moment across the world, probably rising to around a $500 billion market by the end of this decade. So it's by any measure a big and important market, and of course it's also central to how the world runs today. So it's even bigger than just a business initiative.
And apart from trends in demand, what other trends do you see in terms of the use of fixed wireless access, for instance, or any other tendencies?
Yeah, obviously the trends, fiber is key. Fiber to the home is kind of the table stakes, I think, for most offerings, but we're also seeing technology like fiber to the room, fiber to the machine, and so on. We're seeing big challenges, as you mentioned, fixed wireless access becoming increasingly important, but so satellite. And satellites, it's promising to become increasingly important, and the technology is almost there. It is there in many places, and so I think what we'll begin to look at is an umbrella of different technologies that offer the broadband capability depending on the need. Fixed wireless access, where you need to get broadband, good quality broadband in quickly in difficult to get in locations. Satellite can give reasonable quality broadband in very difficult locations. And fiber obviously can give excellent broadband in a huge amount of the urbanized locations across the world. And so you see this umbrella approach of saying, well, can we mix and match all of these different technologies in order to get great broadband to everybody who needs it? One of the things that the World Broadband Association has produced, a thing called the Generational Roadmap as well, which is looking at the different capabilities of broadband that we have today, that we had yesterday, that we have today, and that we'll have over the next few generations up until probably the mid-2030s. And in that, it's not just about speed of broadband, it's also about the latency that is within broadband, but it's also things like the overall availability, because, for example, in smart manufacturing, there's a huge reluctance to use too much connectivity technology and to rely on it too much unless the availability and the reliability is at a level that's equivalent to the sorts of reliabilities of the rest of the production environment. And so I think as we move forward, we've got all these different delivery technologies, we've got different characteristics of broadband that are required, and then different markets, the consumer market's more tolerant, the business and enterprise market is more specific sets of detailed requirements.
And what do you see as the main challenges for accelerated adoption of this umbrella of broadband technologies and customer take-up of those?
Yeah, I think, from a customer point of view, there's always the question of, is it worth paying for? Do I need it? I was in a meeting with some operators over the last couple of days across Europe, and they were saying that the vast majority of needs that consumers have can probably be met with very low quality bandwidth and broadband. But then there's an increasing number of requirements people have that will require excellent broadband, but it still may only be for a very narrow sliver of time. So I think the value for money argument is always going to be a key question. And I think from an operator's point of view, they've got a lot of challenges as well. I mean, the technology is moving so fast. A frustration for operators is we only get one set of technology in place and we're just trying to achieve a return on investment for that technology when the next shiny new toy comes along. And so we move from 100 megabit broadband, 500 megabit broadband to 1 gig, to 10 gig broadband, to 25 gig broadband. And it's all moved so rapidly that it's hard to make a return on investment on any generation of the technology. And then there's legislation challenges from operators, things like, when are we going to switch off copper? Because a lot of operators have traditional copper networks. They've been moving towards fiber, but operating two networks in parallel it's very difficult to be profitable in that scenario. So they would love to be able to more rapidly move maybe towards fiber, but it can be difficult to balance out when am I allowed to actually switch off copper and force my remaining copper customers to move to some of the other technologies like fixed wireless access or fiber. So it's a complicated challenge, whether it's consumer value, whether it's regulation and legislation, or whether it's really on the different moving pieces of new technology.
And you mentioned that different types of customers and use cases might need different bandwidth. So can you give some examples of those that need low bandwidth, those that need faster one?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of your average consumer is developing, are needing the vast majority of bandwidth for simple web browsing, emails, and so on, then next step up is watching their Netflix and Disney Plus and YouTube. And then the next step up is maybe what we're doing here today, where it's a bit of give and take. It's not one-way bandwidth. We need good uplinks and downlinks in terms of bandwidth for video conferencing, for business. And then you start getting to gamers who need not only good high bandwidth, but they need very fast response time, so very low latency. And then you move to what people are talking about in terms of, say, the next generation of technology demands like 3D TV. And, I would say by Christmas 2024, that will start becoming a consumer product. But 3D TV needs somewhere between 3 to 8 times the bandwidth for normal high definition TV. And then you move beyond that into metaverse type of scenarios where people, it's a merging of things like 3D technology and gaming-like response times. And then, so all of that is kind of in the consumer or the home working world. And then you move into big business environments and, where everything from smart manufacturing to smart hospitals to smart retail to smart government. And you've got that whole range of different requirements as well in terms of the types of demands you have. From, as I mentioned earlier on, somebody like smart manufacturing will have certainly bandwidth and latency requirements, but they also have really strong requirements on the reliability and availability of the network. If you're going into smart hospitals and smart medicine, you've got everything from video conferences between doctors and patients, your local GP, to the ideas around robotic surgery, stretching across, thousands of kilometers across the world. And in that case, then of course, bandwidth and latency and reliability becomes hugely important. So I think the opportunities for the demand to grow very significantly and put pressure on the technology and on the operators to deliver that is my experience tells me that once the capability and bandwidth is there and those other capabilities are in place, the demand will emerge, and suddenly what is today an outlier use case will become a must-have use case in 5 years' time.
You mentioned the metaverse. Would you say that broadband networks at the moment are ready to support such deployments?
Not everybody would agree with me, but I would say the broadband is probably okay for supporting metaverse type deployments. Certainly in certain parts of the world, say Asia and China and Korea and Japan, you've got very ubiquitous gigabit broadband, highly reliable. In other parts of the world, it may not be, but in my view, the metaverse has many other challenges that they need to get in place. More computing challenges itself, rather than just the networking challenges. So no, I don't think connectivity is the current blocker to the emergence of the metaverse. In many respects, the metaverse is just, if you look at advanced multiplayer games at the moment, the metaverse is just, it starts at that point and then moves on to more and more complicated scenarios.
Now, I want to focus a bit more on the digital divide, as this has been an ongoing issue for a long time. Is there any change in terms of connecting everyone? What are the main barriers to digital inclusion, and how much of a hurdle is regulation specifically?
Yeah, I think the digital divide, as you mentioned at the start, I'm the Director General of the World Broadband Association, and the World Broadband Association covers the world, as its name indicates, both the developed world and developing world. And you've got a digital divide within each of those environments. You've a digital divide in the developed world, as we know, and that is in many respects maybe narrower than the digital divide between the developed world and the developing world. And if you look at, say, the change that you can make by rolling fiber into a town or a village in a part of the developing world, the second you do that, you change the GDP of that town or village, you change the healthcare prospects for the people in that village through remote medicine and so on, you change the educational prospects, you change the opportunities and prospects and position of women in society by improving connectivity in those environments. So it's not only a nice to have, it's not necessarily or even in any primary way for entertainment. It is really a capability that's going to drive the GDP of economies. In the developed world, then you have a digital divide between the people who can afford to get high quality broadband, and in doing so they can engage with increasingly governments require you to be able to engage with them online. There's educational opportunities online. There are other aspects, how to purchase things and so on online. So the digital divide, I think, in many respects, the combination of fixed fiber broadband and fixed wireless access and general mobile access in the developed world has done a good job, I think, of closing a lot of those aspects of the digital divide. But there's still a huge challenge of the 3 billion unconnected people across the world. And even when they're connected, if they're not connected in an efficient and highly effective way, then the opportunities for that economy are not going to be realized, and they won't be able to move into the smart manufacturing worlds and move up the economic value chain. So connectivity and excellence in connectivity is, in my view, has probably supplanted the importance of investments in roads, or in maybe not more so than clean water, but it's almost at that tier of importance now within developing world, that you put in good roads, you put in clean water, and you put in good connectivity, and that's how you drive an economy.
And now I want to focus on another problem in terms of energy efficiency, which has been long mentioned by many companies. Have you made estimations on the efficiency gains, well, both in terms of speed and power consumption of fiber broadband compared to legacy, older technologies?
Yeah, I mean, of course, fiber is well recorded and well known to be much more efficient from an energy point of view. It's probably about 80% more energy efficient than copper, is the sort of numbers that I would see. And it's more efficient also than mobile, not by the same amount. But when you put fiber in the ground, it's a passive technology, so it needs less interventions, needs less truck rolls in order to fix it. It breaks less often. It's got a very long passive life, so rather than being, maybe need to be fixed or replaced or whatever after 20, 25 years, it can probably go 40 to 50 years in the ground. So all of that makes it a much more efficient, energy efficient type of technology, just by its pure nature. And then, of course, each of the major suppliers are also now looking at the technologies for how do you make the switching equipment and the transmission equipment more and more efficient. The data centers that are running off this more and more energy efficient. And I think that's really it's a very central discussion in the WBBA. One of the 4 key projects that we have running at the moment is around the sustainability, how the introduction of broadband is changing some of the dynamics of the developing world, but in particular how fiber is able to drive the energy efficiency argument across the world.
Finally, Martin, what are the goals of the World Broadband Association for the next, say, decade?
Well, the World Broadband Association started about 18 months ago. And in that time, its ambition is to become the industry association for the fixed broadband industry, primarily. Its genesis really was a set of discussions between industry players saying, we've got a great industry association in the GSMA for the mobile world, but there's nothing equivalent in the fixed world. And whilst there are lots of industry associations that are defining the standards and technologies and so on around fixed broadband, there isn't really an industry association that addresses the whole business enablement opportunity, the advocacy for the industry, becomes a place where the industry can do business. And GSMA does that for the mobile world. So I think the big overarching ambition for the WBBA is to be the GSMA for the fixed broadband industry. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a clean line between fixed broadband and mobile broadband and satellite broadband. It's all within one umbrella or under one umbrella. But I think that ultimately the WBBA will be primarily focusing just on the fixed, on creating those opportunities for the fixed broadband world. And it's working in a range of different areas. Certainly, advocacy is one of the most important aspects that WBBA is focused on, and that is to become a voice for the broadband industry to all of the key stakeholders, whether that is governments and regulators, whether it's investments and investors and private equity and so on, or whether it's just a way of communicating between the operators and suppliers, or whether it's a way of the supply side and the demand side having conversations. The WBBA will be an industry association that creates the environment for those sorts of discussions. It creates the key measurements of the progress of the industry, so that we can then have those discussions on a global basis as to where different countries are progressing well and where they're not progressing well on broadband, and what are the things that are blocking the progress of broadband, and then how can those roadblocks be removed, and trying to take good examples from one part of the world and bring them into another part of the world, whether it's good ideas in terms of technology rollout, or whether it's good ideas in terms of regulation and supply side incentives and demand side incentives. So the focus of the WBBA is really around being that discussion place, a place to do business, the mouthpiece of advocacy on behalf of the industry. And the key topics that we'll be looking at are some of the things we talked about today. Not so much trying to advance the technology itself, because I think that's well covered by other great industry associations. But it's more about the topics such as sustainability, such as the digital divide, and how we can address those topics. So that's really where the ambition is over the coming decade.
By the looks of it, the World Broadband Association will have a lot on their plate to support the ongoing deployments of fixed broadband globally. Thanks for joining us today, Martin.
Thank you. Very interesting.